That evening marked a turning point in my life, one that I could never have anticipated. It all started with a seemingly innocuous request from my stepmother, Maya, asking me to remain at home while my father departed for his regular fishing trip. At the time, it felt like a routine occurrence, as it was typically just the two of us on weekends. However, I was unaware that this particular night would evolve into an extraordinary experience, one that would challenge the dynamics of our relationship and leave a lasting impression on me. The house was unusually quiet that morning. The familiar presence of my father was absent, and the silence felt unsettling. I had just completed my homework and was preparing to unwind when Maya summoned me to the living room. "Can you assist me with something?" she inquired, her voice soft and almost too casual. I could sense her anxiety, though I could not discern its cause. After a brief moment of hesitation, I replied, "Sure, what do you need?" As I approached her, Maya typically exuded a calm demeanor, but today there was an unmistakable shift in the atmosphere. She smiled, yet there was an intensity in her gaze that quickened my heartbeat. "Come sit down," she said, gesturing to the cushion beside her. I complied, feeling a mix of apprehension and curiosity about what was to unfold. Leaning back, she crossed her legs and regarded me with an intensity one had not previously observed. "You've matured so much, you know," she remarked, her tone light, yet the words carried a weight of unspoken significance. "You're not the little boy I once knew." My heart raced. This was not typical of her. Our relationship had always been friendly and somewhat casual, but today felt different, almost perilous. "I guess," I replied, uncertain of how to react. She leaned in slightly, her gaze unwavering. "No, really," she insisted. "You've changed, and I believe we both recognize it." The way she articulated this made me shiver, as an unusual tension began to fill the room, leaving me at a loss for how to alleviate it. "Maya, what are you trying to convey?" I finally asked, mustering the courage to voice my confusion. I finally mustered the courage to ask the question that had been weighing on my mind. I needed clarity about the situation. The atmosphere was thick with unspoken tension. For a brief moment, she remained silent, her gaze fixed on mine as if searching for the appropriate words. Then, with a sigh, she rose and moved toward the window. "Your father is away for the weekend," she said quietly, her eyes focused on the yard outside. "It's just the two of us here." I nodded, uncertain of the direction this conversation would take, feeling a tightening sensation in my stomach. She turned to face me, her expression inscrutable. "You know, I've been reflecting," she began, her voice calm yet gentle. "There are matters I've wanted to discuss with you, things I've lacked the courage to express until now." I swallowed hard, prompting her to continue. "Like what?" I inquired. She stepped closer, her gaze locking onto mine. "Like us," she stated simply. The word lingered in the air, causing my heart to race. What was she suggesting? This was confusing. I attempted to dismiss it with a laugh, but my voice trembled. "What do you mean, us?" Maya offered a small, knowing smile that sent my stomach into a whirl. "You've noticed it too, haven't you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "The way our relationship has evolved. We're not merely stepmother and stepson anymore." My mind raced to comprehend her words, grappling with the reality of the situation. Yet, a part of me recognized the truth. I had sensed a shift over the past few months, the fleeting glances, the lingering touches. I had consistently dismissed those feelings, convincing myself they were insignificant. "I don't know what you're talking about." I lied, my voice scarcely audible. She stepped even closer, her presence enveloping me, making the room feel constricted. "Yes, you do," she replied softly, her fingers brushing against my arm. "You felt it too." She spoke softly, her fingers lightly grazing my arm. "You felt it too." I stood up suddenly, stepping away from her in an attempt to clear my mind. "Maya, this is insane." I said, my voice quivering. You are my stepmother. We cannot, we should not. Yet, she did not retreat. Instead, she closed the gap between us once more. Why not? She whispered, her eyes aflame with a fervor that quickened my heartbeat. We are both adults. We need not adhere to anyone else's expectations. I shook my head, striving to resist the magnetic pull that drew me nearer to her. No, this is not right, I insisted, even as my determination began to falter. But what if it is? She countered, her hand reaching out to caress my cheek. The touch sent a surge through me, momentarily paralyzing me in the intricate web she was spinning around us. I wanted to refuse, to push her away, to flee the room and erase this moment from my memory, yet something kept me anchored in place, and I despised myself for it. I could not shake the sensation that events were spiraling beyond my control. The atmosphere in the house had become unbearable. Each time I encountered Maya, I felt the oppressive weight of unspoken words suffocating me. I was at a loss for how to address it, how to halt the gradual, inevitable pull that seemed to be leading us both toward peril. The days melded into one another, and every exchange between us felt charged, as if we were treading on a razor's edge. I attempted to maintain my distance, avoiding solitude with her whenever possible, but it proved difficult. She always found a way to be near, to assert her presence, whether through a casual touch on my arm or the intensity of her gaze from across the room. This simmering tension lingered, refusing to dissipate. Then came the night when everything shifted. My father was working late, and I sought refuge in my room, hoping that by evading her long enough, normalcy would return. Yet deep down, I knew that was a futile hope. I attempted to remain secluded in my room, hoping that by avoiding her for a while, circumstances would revert to their previous state. However, deep down, I recognized that such a resolution was unlikely. I could hear her moving about downstairs, accompanied by the soft murmur of the television in the background. The clock on my wall ticked loudly, each second stretching out and making it increasingly difficult to ignore the reality of our situation. I contemplated reaching out to a friend, fabricating an excuse to leave the house, yet something restrained me from making the call. Instead, I found myself standing outside my room, absorbing the silence that had enveloped the house. It was unnervingly quiet, too still, and that was when I resolved to take a step that would alter everything. I descended the stairs, each step feeling more burdensome than the last. Maya was seated on the couch, a glass of wine in hand, her gaze lost as she focused on the television. She did not notice my presence at first, or perhaps she did but chose to ignore it. I lingered at the bottom of the stairs, uncertain of what to say or even why I was there. Then, she looked up, our eyes locking, and I realized there was no turning back. "Couldn't sleep?" she inquired, her voice soft and almost too casual. There was a quality in her tone that quickened my pulse, reminiscent of that initial day. "Yeah," I replied, hesitant to elaborate further. I moved to the couch, positioning myself as far from her as possible, yet even with that distance, the tension between us was palpable and unspoken. We sat in silence for a few moments, the only sound being the gentle hum of the television. I sensed her gaze upon me, her eyes lingering in a manner that sent a shiver down my spine. I was at a loss for how to break the silence without exacerbating the situation. Before I could gather my thoughts, she spoke. "Again, I've been thinking about us," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. My heart raced. "Maya, we can't." I began, but she interrupted me. "Why not?" she asked, turning to face me fully. "Why are we pretending there's nothing between us?" The question lingered in the air. Why are we feigning ignorance about the undeniable connection between us? Her words struck me with the force of a blow, leaving me momentarily breathless. I felt an urge to dispute her, to assert that she was mistaken and that we could not pursue this path. Yet, Deep down, I recognized that I lacked the resolve to resist any longer. I, too, had sensed a peculiar attraction that had intensified over time. Despite my efforts to dismiss it and convince myself of its non-existence, sitting beside her made it impossible to ignore any further. "We cannot proceed with this," I stated, though my tone betrayed a lack of certainty. Even as I uttered those words, I was aware of their falsehood. I was deceiving both her and myself. She leaned in closer, her hand resting on the cushion that separated us. "We are not doing anything wrong," she murmured, her voice low and fervent. "We are not causing harm to anyone." I shook my head, attempting to dispel the confusion clouding my mind. "But it is not right," I countered feebly. She reached out, placing her hand atop mine, her touch igniting a spark within me. "Who determines what is right and what is wrong?" she inquired, her voice unwavering, her gaze locked onto mine. I swallowed hard, my heart racing. I yearned to withdraw, to urge her to stop, yet I found myself paralyzed, ensnared by the intensity of the moment and the emotions I had long sought to suppress. "We need not adhere to anyone else's standards," she whispered, her fingers delicately tracing patterns on the back of my hand. "We can define what is right for ourselves." I closed my eyes, attempting to block out her voice and the sensation of her touch, but it was futile. The barriers I had constructed around my heart were disintegrating, and I felt powerless to halt the process. Before I could articulate a response or muster the courage to distance myself, she leaned in even closer, her lips grazing my ear as she whispered, "Tell me you don't feel it too." Her words sent a shiver coursing through me, and I despised how my body reacted to her, how desperately I wanted to surrender. I opened my mouth to object, to assert that this was wrong, and that we could not continue down this path, but no words emerged. I felt an overwhelming urge to surrender. I opened my mouth to voice my objections, to express that this was wrong and that we should not proceed, yet no words emerged. Instead, I found myself turning to face her, my breath hitching in my throat as our gazes locked. The moment lingered, the tension between us thickening with each passing second. Then, almost instinctively, I leaned in and kissed her. Initially, it was gentle and tentative, as if we were both gauging the waters, uncertain of what would follow. However, the kiss soon intensified, the heat between us escalating as we succumbed to the desire that had been simmering for so long. My hands instinctively moved to her waist, drawing her closer, while her fingers wove through my hair. The world around us faded away, leaving only the two of us enveloped in the intensity of the moment. I was acutely aware that this was wrong, that we were crossing an irrevocable boundary, yet I could not bring myself to stop. I did not wish to stop. As the kiss deepened, my mind raced with a torrent of conflicting thoughts. I recognized the danger, understood that we were playing with fire, but a part of me was indifferent, a part that had longed for this more than I was willing to admit. When we finally broke apart, both of us gasping for breath, our faces mere inches apart, I noticed her eyes were dark, filled with an emotion I could not quite identify. I realized that our relationship would never return to its previous state. "I've wanted this for so long," she whispered, her breath warm against my skin. "And I know you have too." I could not respond. The truth was too overwhelming for me to articulate. Instead, I simply nodded, my heart racing as the gravity of our actions settled upon me. Yet, even in that moment, I understood that this was merely the beginning. There was more to come, and there would always be more. I realized then that this was not the end. The kiss had merely marked the beginning of something deeper. There was an undeniable connection that would persist. After that night, everything shifted between us. I could no longer view Maya in the same light. Each time our gazes met, a wave of warmth surged through me, a vivid reminder of our shared moment and the unspoken potential for more. The atmosphere in the house felt charged with an unnameable tension, a mutual understanding that we both hesitated to confront directly. As days went by, an awkward silence enveloped us. I attempted to maintain my distance, yet avoiding her entirely proved impossible. Every fleeting touch, every exchanged glance ignited a spark, threatening to set ablaze the simmering tension that lay just beneath the surface. I recognized that what was unfolding was inappropriate, yet the magnetic pull between us was undeniable, no matter how hard I resisted. One afternoon, while my father was out, the oppressive silence in the house became unbearable. I found myself pacing the living room, trying to distract myself with the television, but my thoughts continually returned to her. The memory of that kiss, the sensation of her lips against mine, the exhilaration that had coursed through me. It was overwhelming, and I despised myself for dwelling on it, yet I was powerless to stop. Just as I felt I might lose my sanity, I heard her footsteps approaching. I turned to see Maya standing in the doorway, her expression inscrutable. For a moment, we remained silent, the air thick with unspoken words. "We need to talk," she finally said, her voice soft and tentative. I nodded, fully aware that this conversation was unavoidable, even if I was unprepared for it. "Yes," I replied, my throat constricted. "We do." She moved to the couch and sat down with a sigh. I followed suit, positioning myself across from her while maintaining a careful distance. My heart raced, and I struggled to meet her gaze. I was at a loss for words, unsure of how to initiate a dialogue that could alleviate the weight of our situation. "I know things have changed," she began, her hands clasped in her lap, "and I don't want you to feel uncomfortable." She sat with her hands clasped in her lap, and I wanted to ensure she felt at ease. That was my foremost concern. I swallowed hard, my throat dry, uncertain of my emotions. I confessed, my voice barely audible. "This isn't normal, is it? We shouldn't be feeling this way." Maya glanced down at her hands, her expression one of concern. "I know," she replied softly, "but it's not something we can simply overlook, is it?" I had no response for her. The reality was that I was unsure of what we were meant to do. Everything felt amiss, yet a part of me was reluctant for it to end. I couldn't articulate or justify it, but the feelings were undeniable and genuine. She shifted on the couch, leaning forward slightly. "I think about that night constantly," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can't stop thinking about it." My breath hitched in my throat. I wanted to tell her that I too was haunted by it, that it lingered in my thoughts at all times, but the words eluded me. Instead, I simply nodded, my heart racing. A long silence enveloped us, heavy with the unspoken truths between us. I sensed the tension rising again, that same perilous attraction that had initially drawn us together. Then, before I could restrain myself, I blurted out, "I think about it too." The words escaped my lips before I could retract them, and once uttered, they could not be taken back. Maya's gaze met mine, and in that instant, I realized we had crossed a threshold. We were now teetering on the brink of something far more perilous. She remained silent at first, but the expression in her eyes conveyed everything I needed to understand. We found ourselves on the brink of something far more perilous. Initially, she remained silent, yet the expression in her eyes conveyed everything I needed to understand. There was a fervor, a longing that reflected my own, and it filled me with both fear and an undeniable thrill. "We cannot continue like this," I stated, my voice trembling. Even as I spoke, I questioned my own conviction. Maya's gaze remained fixed on mine. "I know," she murmured, "but we are already here, aren't we?" The confines of the room felt stifling, the atmosphere dense. I yearned to escape, to create as much distance as possible between us, yet I found myself immobilized, not by her, but by my own cravings. The magnetic pull between us was too potent, too consuming to resist. Before I could comprehend the moment, she leaned closer, her face mere inches from mine. I could feel her warm, gentle breath against my skin, and my heart raced. For a fleeting instant, I considered withdrawing, halting this before it escalated further. But then her lips met mine, and all logical thought vanished. This kiss was unlike the previous ones. It was no longer tentative or uncertain. It was charged with the tension we had suppressed, the desire that had been accumulating for far too long. I responded instinctively, my hands clutching the fabric of the couch to anchor myself. This was not about love or tenderness. It was a primal, burning need that neither of us could contain. My heart raced, my mind a whirlwind of incoherent thoughts. All I understood was that, in this moment, there was no turning back. When we finally separated, both of us gasping for breath, our foreheads touched, the gravity of our actions lingering heavily in the air. Yet, neither of us made a move to disrupt the silence. "We must stop," I reiterated, though my voice was feeble, lacking resolve. Maya nodded, her breath warm against my skin. "I know," she whispered, "but it's so difficult, isn't it?" I remained silent. There was nothing more to say. We found ourselves ensnared in a web of our own making, and despite our repeated assertions that we should cease this entanglement, the magnetic pull between us relentlessly drew us back together. It was at that moment that she leaned in once more, and we succumbed to the inevitable. The encounter unfolded swiftly, as exhilarating as it was fleeting. It ended almost as abruptly as it had begun. I sensed that the intensity was somewhat overwhelming for me, yet she appeared unfazed. Afterward, she smiled, conveying her enjoyment of the experience, normalcy, striving to act as if nothing had transpired. However, the tension between us was palpable. Each time I encountered her, I felt that familiar rush of warmth and the same perilous attraction, as if we were orbiting one another, poised for the moment we would ultimately surrender again. I understood it was merely a question of time. One evening, while my father was working late, I found myself in the kitchen, attempting to distract myself by preparing dinner. The silence enveloping the house was oppressive, making concentration nearly impossible. Every sound reverberated, amplifying the gravity of our actions. I did not notice her arrival until I turned around to find her leaning against the door frame, observing me with an inscrutable expression. "Need any help?" she inquired, her tone casual. Yet there was an undercurrent that quickened my heartbeat. "No, I'm fine," I replied, though my hands trembled. She approached, standing uncomfortably close, her presence almost overwhelming. "Are you sure?" I swallowed hard, striving to regain my composure. "Maya, we can't—" I began, but she interrupted me. "We don't have to do anything," she said softly, her gaze fixed on mine. "But I think we both understand where this is headed." The words lingered between us, heavy with finality. I wanted to dispute her, to assert that she was mistaken, but I found myself unable to do so, for deep down, I recognized the truth in her statement. I felt compelled to express my disagreement, to assert that she was mistaken. However, deep down, I recognized her correctness. We remained in silence, the distance between us diminishing with each passing moment. Suddenly, before I realized it, she kissed me once more. The kiss was brief, almost ephemeral, yet it was sufficient to rekindle all that we had been attempting to suppress. My heart raced, and I understood that this was merely the beginning. The subsequent weeks became a haze of stolen moments and fleeting glances, as if I were navigating two distinct realities. One where everything appeared ordinary, and another where Maya and I teetered on the brink of an uncontrollable force. The burden of our secret weighed heavily upon us, yet we found it impossible to remain apart, despite my repeated assertions that it should end. Each time my father left for work or returned late, the tension between us intensified. I would find myself in the same room as her, and without uttering a word, we both understood what was imminent. It was alarming how effortlessly we had descended into this dynamic. Every touch and glance felt like a transgression of an unseen boundary. Yet, rather than retreating, we were inexorably drawn closer, as if an unseen force beyond our comprehension was steering us along this path. One Saturday afternoon, the atmosphere in the house felt particularly charged. My father was attending a company event and would not return until late. I sensed a shift the moment I awoke that morning, a familiar, quiet anticipation. As the hours passed, I could not shake the feeling that something significant was about to unfold, something from which there would be no return. When I entered the kitchen, Maya was washing dishes, her back turned to me. Yet, she must have sensed my presence, as she did not flinch upon my arrival. I lingered by the door, observing her for a moment, uncertain of how to proceed. This had become our routine, this peculiar dance we were ensnared in, and I had learned the steps all too well. She turned off the tap and dried her hands on a towel before facing me for a brief moment. Neither of us uttered a word. The silence was deafening, filled with all the unspoken thoughts between us. "Are you okay?" she inquired, her voice gentle, her gaze searching mine. I wasn't okay. I hadn't been for some time, but how could I confess that? How could I articulate the turmoil that was brewing within me, the ongoing struggle between right and wrong? "I don't know," I finally responded, my voice barely above a whisper. Maya approached me, halting just a few feet away. "I've been thinking," she started, her words measured and careful. "Perhaps we should discuss what has been occurring." I tensed, uncertain if I wanted to engage in this conversation. What more could be said that our actions hadn't already conveyed? Yet, she was resolute, and I understood that I could not evade this topic indefinitely. "What is there to discuss?" I asked, my heart racing. She sighed, rubbing her forehead with the back of her hand. "I don't know, but maybe we need to determine the direction this is heading. We cannot continue living like this, pretending it isn't happening." She was correct, but I was reluctant to confront it. "Where do you think it's going?" I asked, my tone sharper than I intended. Maya flinched slightly, but maintained her gaze. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I do know we cannot keep skirting around it." I ran a hand through my hair, frustration welling up inside me. "What do you want from me?" I snapped, not out of anger towards her, but because I lacked the answers as well. "Do you want me to say this is acceptable, that I am fine with it? Because I am not. I am not fine with any of this." Her expression softened as she stepped closer, bridging the gap between us. "I don't want you to be fine with it," she said quietly. "I just want you to be honest with yourself and with me." Her words struck me like a blow to the stomach, for I understood precisely what she meant. I had been deceiving myself for an extended period, persuading myself that this was merely a temporary situation that would resolve itself if we chose to overlook it long enough. However, the reality was that I could not cease my thoughts of her. My desire for her was unrelenting. The more I attempted to suppress these feelings, the more intense they became. I confess, my voice trembling, that I did not know how to confront this truth. Maya extended her hand, gently placing it on my arm, and the contact sent a shiver through me, intensifying my longing for her. "It's all right," she murmured, her eyes brimming with empathy. "We will navigate this together." The sincerity in her tone shattered something within me, and before I realized it, I was drawing her closer, kissing her as if it were the only thing anchoring me to reality. This kiss was not hurried or chaotic. It was slow and intentional, as if we were both striving to grasp something that was eluding us. When we finally separated, her forehead rested against mine, and we lingered in silence, our breaths intertwining in the small space that separated us. I could sense her heartbeat, rapid and erratic, mirroring my own. "What are we doing?" I whispered, more to myself than to her. "I don't know," she answered softly. "But I can't stop. Neither could I." As the days unfolded, we became increasingly entwined in whatever this connection was. The moments we shared intensified and multiplied until it felt as though I was only truly myself in her presence. I understood that this could not endure, that something would eventually have to give, yet I was not prepared to confront that reality. Then, one evening, everything fell apart. I was seated in the living room, the television on but muted, my thoughts adrift. Maya was upstairs, and Dad was expected to be out late again, but I was oblivious to the passage of time, too consumed by my own thoughts regarding everything we had experienced and all that we could not change. The sound of the front door creaking open jolted me from my reverie, and for a brief moment, I was paralyzed. A surge of panic welled up within me. I had not anticipated Dad's early return. I hurriedly attempted to rise, but before I could fully react, he had already entered the living room, his gaze sweeping across the room before settling on me. "Hey," he said, his tone casual yet tinged with an undertone I could not identify. "What are you doing? Just watching TV?" I responded, my voice strained as I fought to conceal my anxiety. My heart raced, and guilt gnawed at me like a live wire. He appeared oblivious to my distress, or perhaps he was deliberately choosing to overlook it. He took a seat on the couch, casually flipping through the channels as if it were just another ordinary evening. I endeavored to calm myself, to reassure myself that all was well, but the burden of our secret weighed heavily upon me, suffocating me. A few minutes later, Maya descended the stairs, her expression carefully composed. She greeted Dad as if nothing were amiss, as if everything were perfectly normal. Yet I could detect the tension in her eyes and the way her hands fidgeted at her sides. Dinner that evening was torturous. The conversation felt forced, and with each word Dad uttered, I sensed the walls closing in around me. I could not meet Maya's gaze, unable to concentrate on anything other than the knot of fear tightening in my chest. I had hoped that we could navigate the evening without any complications, that perhaps we could maintain the pretense for just one more night. However, as we were clearing the table, my father suddenly turned to me, his expression inscrutable. "You have been spending a considerable amount of time with Maya lately," he remarked, his voice calm yet probing. My heart sank. I glanced at Maya, who had turned pale, her eyes wide with apprehension. I suppose," I stammered, striving to keep my voice steady. My father's gaze lingered on me for an extended moment, and I sensed a shift in the atmosphere. "Is there anything you wish to share with me?" he inquired, his tone remaining casual. Yet there was an undercurrent that sent chills through me. I opened my mouth to reply, but no words emerged. My mind raced, desperately searching for something, anything, that could dispel this tension, but I found myself at a loss. I could not fabricate a lie when the truth loomed so closely between us, almost ready to be unveiled. Maya's hand brushed against mine beneath the table, a silent entreaty, but it only intensified my guilt. "No," I finally whispered, my voice barely above a murmur. My father remained silent for what felt like an eternity, simply observing me with those inscrutable eyes. In that silence, I understood that he was aware. As I stood there, the weight of his gaze felt suffocating, and I came to the realization that there was no evading what had already commenced. Even if the words remained unspoken, the truth lingered, waiting to follow me, no matter how fervently I attempted to escape it.